I sat with my anger long enough until she told me her real name was grief. This quote by C.S. Lewis has stuck with me since I was a child. I always wondered how. Really, how could anger be grief? It didn't make sense to me back then. But now, with time and experience, I've come to realize that anger is often grief. We usually associate grief with losing someone, but in many cases, it's the loss of something. And that's the key to understanding it. Think about it. It could be the loss of feeling valued, the loss of appreciation, or even the loss of being treated equally. These things don't just happen all at once, they build up over time. And then when something or someone triggers those feelings of loss, bam, anger hits. We feel so enraged, so triggered, that it leads to an outburst we can't always control or even fully understand at the moment. That's exactly what happened to me recently. I was so angry, completely consumed by it. At first, I wasn't thinking about that quote or trying to analyze why I felt this way. I was just angry. But then, as I sat with that anger and began to unpack it, something started to shift. I started to understand where it was really coming from. It wasn't just frustration about the present moment. It was all these little unrecognized losses adding up. And suddenly, that quote resurfaced in my mind. I sat with my anger long enough until she told me her real name was grief. And yeah, that was it. It clicked. It's not always about losing someone we love. Sometimes it's about losing the things we didn't even realize mattered to us as a child, like validation, respect, or recognition. When we lose those things, they leave an emptiness inside, and anger steps in as a defense mechanism to protect those vulnerable places. So the next time you feel a surge of anger or frustration, try to pause. Sit with it. Ask yourself, what have I lost? Not what am I grieving that's hidden beneath this anger? You might be surprised by what you find. All right, so welcome back to my channel. I'm Arij, a psychologist and life coach with a global community of thousands of learners. My goal is simple, to help you grow, change, and step into the best version of yourself. Now, if you're really serious about leveling up your life, don't forget to check out my Patreon for exclusive content, all my paid courses, and personal coaching. Let's take that journey together. First, I want to take a moment to say how grateful I am to God for this opportunity and for all of you watching. Thank you, really appreciate it. Now, I want you to repeat after me. I am letting everything go. Cool. Let's start with that mindset. So, as I mentioned earlier, I've decided to document what I'm learning every day through these videos and share it with you, hoping that we can all grow and learn together. Right now, I'm reading about 4 different books, and today I want to talk about something I found particularly insightful in the Psychiatric interview by Stevenson. What really stood out to me today is how, during a psychiatric interview, it's not just about gathering factual information from a patient, but more about understanding the deeper meaning and emotional weight behind those events in their lives. It's fascinating, because the factual details can be incomplete or unreliable, but the emotions tied to those experiences often reveal much more. For instance, a patient might share a memory, but what's really important is how they feel about it now, how their attitude toward that event may have changed over time, and what emotional significance it holds for them. What's even more interesting is that emotions often speak louder than words. As a psychiatrist, or really as any of us who are trying to understand someone better, it's crucial to not just listen to what's being said, but to pay attention to how it's being said. Emotions play such a key role in this. A patient's emotional reactions to certain topics can offer valuable insights into their sensitivities and vulnerabilities. And often, it's not the big, obvious emotions we're looking for, but those subtle clues, the way someone hesitates, the slight change in their voice, or their body language. All of these nonverbal cues provide a much deeper understanding of what's really going on beneath the surface. One of the major takeaways for me is that it's not always easy for patients to fully express their thoughts or feelings during these interviews. And it's not necessarily because they don't want to, but because there are both conscious and unconscious barriers at play. For example, people often want to present themselves in a favorable light. It's a natural human tendency, especially when we're talking about sensitive issues like family, work, or personal struggles. This can be even more challenging for psychiatric patients who might already be feeling insecure or unsure of themselves. What's even more complicated is that sometimes there are parts of their experiences or feelings that they're just not consciously aware of, things buried in the subconscious. So even when they're trying to be as honest as possible, there might be layers of emotion or behavior they can't fully explain simply because they don't know they exist. And then there's the issue of language. Even when people do know what they're feeling, putting those feelings into words is a whole other challenge. Language often falls short when we're trying to express complex emotions like pain, grief, or even joy. So psychiatrists, and I think all of us in everyday life, have to be aware of that limitation. We have to look beyond the words and tune into the emotional undercurrents that accompany them. Another thing that struck me is how unreliable our memories can be. A patient's recollection of an event might not always match up with the facts, or their memory might shift over time, influenced by emotions or even just the process of recalling the event. That's why it's so important to pay attention to how a person feels when they talk about something, not just the details of the story itself. In fact, emotional reactions often provide more reliable clues about what truly matters to someone than the factual accuracy of the memory. I found it fascinating how these emotional cues manifest in both verbal and nonverbal ways. Someone might avoid certain topics, speak faster when discussing something painful, or even pause when they're feeling particularly vulnerable. These subtle changes in speech patterns, facial expressions, or body language, like tensing up, sighing, or avoiding eye contact, are all signals that can offer deeper insights into their emotional state. And let's not forget about the physical side of emotions. Our bodies often react before our minds fully register what's going on. The autonomic nervous system kicks in, leading to physical signs like changes in breathing, heart rate, or even sweating. You know when someone suddenly goes pale or flushes with emotion? That's their body reacting to stress or discomfort, even if they're not saying much about it. The psychiatrist, or again, even in our day-to-day interactions, can pick up on these physical cues to gauge how someone is really feeling. These psychophysiological symptoms, like palpitations or tension in the body, are often indicators of emotional distress, even when the patient might not verbalize it directly. What I really took away from today's reading is the importance of timing. Once a psychiatrist identifies an emotional reaction, they have to decide whether it's the right moment to explore that topic further, or if it's better to come back to it later when the patient is more prepared. It's all about balancing sensitivity and understanding, knowing when to push a little deeper and when to give someone the space to process things in their own time. So, to sum it up, in psychiatric interviews, and really in life, it's crucial to not only collect facts, but to delve into the emotions that lie behind those facts. Observing emotional responses, whether they're spoken or unspoken, gives us a much better understanding of what's really going on beneath the surface. And while it can be hard to fully express or even understand our own emotions sometimes, recognizing those subtle cues in others can help us navigate those deeper, often hidden layers of experience. I find that really powerful, and I'm looking forward to sharing more of what I'm learning with you all as we go along this journey together. The prologue of Facing Trauma introduces trauma as a universal human experience, affecting not only individuals who directly encounter it, such as soldiers or abuse victims, but also their families and communities. Trauma leaves lasting imprints on personal emotions, relationships, and even biological systems, and these effects can ripple across generations and cultures. Trauma is more widespread than many realize, as many people experience childhood abuse, domestic violence, or sexual assault. This is not limited to personal situations. Trauma can also result from larger-scale events such as wars or natural disasters. Trauma's impact on survivors goes beyond emotional scars. It severely disrupts their mental health, making it difficult to experience joy, trust, or intimacy. It also affects their physical health, with the brain's survival mechanisms remaining in a constant state of alert, leading to stress responses long after the event. This hypervigilance is one of the many challenges trauma survivors face as their bodies and minds continue to react to small triggers, often in ways that feel overwhelming and out of control. Trauma does not only affect the individual, it can transfer to their families, who may also suffer from emotional distress, depression, or anxiety. This makes forming healthy, trusting relationships in adulthood even more difficult for trauma survivors. Efforts to suppress traumatic memories are often futile, as the brain resists denial. This is where the science of trauma comes in, with three emerging fields: neuroscience, developmental psychopathology, and interpersonal neurobiology, helping to shed light on how trauma changes brain function and behavior. These scientific advances explain why trauma survivors often remain hypervigilant and find it hard to engage in everyday life. Trauma doesn't just alter emotions or behavior, it causes physiological changes in the brain, such as the hyperactivation of the brain's alarm system and shifts in stress hormone levels. This can trap survivors in cycles of destructive behavior, not because of a lack of willpower, but because trauma has reshaped their brains. These discoveries have changed the way trauma is understood, from a question of moral failing or weakness to a condition with treatable psychological and physiological effects. Hypervigilance, for example, is not merely a symptom of anxiety, but a deeply ingrained state of heightened alertness that trauma survivors experience in seemingly safe environments. Neuroscience explores how trauma rewires the brain, while developmental psychopathology looks at how early experiences of trauma, such as abuse or neglect, affect brain development and emotional regulation. Interpersonal neurobiology examines how our relationships and interactions with others influence our brain development and emotional health. In conclusion, trauma is a pervasive issue that affects individuals, families, and communities, and modern science has made significant strides in understanding how it impacts both the brain and behavior. Trauma survivors struggle to regulate emotions, build trust, and recover, not because of moral failings, but due to the physiological changes trauma brings. By recognizing this, we can better address and treat the long-lasting effects of trauma. Turning to psychoanalysis, early psychoanalysts focused primarily on the unconscious, particularly the id, which holds our most basic desires and instincts. At first, the emphasis was on exploring these repressed parts of the psyche, often viewing the study of the ego as a deviation from true psychoanalysis. Over time, however, Freud expanded the field to include the ego and superego, making psychoanalysis a more comprehensive study of the mind. The id represents our primal instincts and is driven by the pleasure principle, constantly seeking immediate gratification. The ego, however, mediates between the id's desires, the superego's moral standards, and the demands of reality. Governed by the reality principle, the ego weighs the consequences before acting on the id's impulses. Meanwhile, the superego represents our internalized morals and ideals, often criticizing the ego's decisions when they conflict with moral expectations. In psychoanalysis, the interplay between these three psychic structures, the ego, and superego, is crucial. Conflicts between the id's desires and the ego's rational control often lead to tension, repression, and anxiety, with the ego playing a central role in balancing these internal struggles. The therapist's role is to explore these conflicts and help the patient restore balance between these internal forces. The discussion of the two systems of thinking, System 1 and System 2, provides insight into how we process information. System 1 is fast, intuitive, and operates unconsciously, producing immediate reactions and judgments without much effort. For example, when you see an angry expression on someone's face, you instantly recognize their emotion without needing to analyze it. System 2, in contrast, is slow, deliberate, and requires conscious effort, as seen when solving complex problems like a math equation. While System 1 quickly generates impressions and feelings that guide most of our decisions, System 2 steps in for tasks that require logical reasoning. These two systems work together, with System 1 offering quick, intuitive responses, and System 2 taking over when deeper analysis is needed. Despite its speed and efficiency, System 1 is prone to biases and errors, which is where System 2's methodical reasoning helps correct those mistakes. Understanding how these two systems interact highlights the complexities of human thought, with each playing a vital role in our decision-making processes. And before we wrap up, I want to invite you to take your journey even further. If you're ready to dive deeper into topics like this and make meaningful changes in your life, I encourage you to explore my Patreon. You'll find exclusive content, in-depth courses, and personalized coaching that are designed to support your personal growth. It's a space where you can connect with like-minded individuals and build a community focused on learning and thriving together. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you found some valuable insights to take with you. Remember, every small step forward is progress. I'll see you in another episode of What I Learned in a Day. And if you have any specific topics you'd like me to cover, feel free to share them in the comments below. Your input means the world to me, and I want to create content that resonates with you. Until next time, take care and keep shining.